The next section for TA southbounders is the town of Wanaka to the city of Queenstown. Pardon my pronunciation on Wanaka. It is 55.6 miles. That mileage will fluctuate because, as you'll see later in the video, we stopped in Frankton and then got a ride into Queenstown, and then the following day went back to pick up and connect our steps where we left off. So when you leave the town of Wanaka, you have this long, sprawling lake walk. And the lake walk, get prepared, it's not as easy as you may think. Elevation profile, again, makes it look easier, but we'll get into that in a second. This is the Wanaka tree, which is a very popular tourist photography tree. This is the track, the Glendew Bay track. And again, the elevation profile on your maps will make it look quote-unquote flat. It's a little more roller coastery than you will anticipate. You go up these steep bluffs and then down the backside. As you can see, the winding track is going down, right back up the other bluff. So your pace will take an impact, not a giant one. We were just lazy that day. As you've seen, we've sat down many times and taken many breaks. It is also very hot in this section, so if you don't want to drink lake water, again, recommend carrying out of Wanaka. There is a campground that will have water in about 6 miles from Wanaka proper, so you can also fill up there if you do not want to drink that lake water. This is said campground. It is a holiday park. It's called Glendew Bay Campground, but there is a holiday park either this or right next to it. It's like 2 adjoining campgrounds, so you can camp there if you want to just take a slow day out of town. If you decide to go past, you enter this portion of track called the Mutatapu track. Pardon my pronunciation. This track will significantly impact your pace. I've said that many times in videos, but I want to stress the importance of the significant impact to the pace here. It is straight up thousands of feet of elevation, straight back down, not much connector pieces to average it out. The initial ascent here, as you can see, is gradual, but that's the only gradual stuff you're going to get for the pretty much remainder of the section until you hit Mace Town on the other side, which I'll show you later. But this is the initial ascent up to a hut called Fernburn Hut. A few portions of washout, not too difficult to navigate, just slower going ultimately. You start in this wooded portion, very, very, very steep. The wooded portion is quite steep. So once you break through the forested portion, it starts to level out a little bit, but ultimately just get ready for a whole lot of climbing. Cannot stress that enough. I would build in an extra day even to your itinerary to get from Wanaka to Queenstown, because this trail is just so chunky and so slow going. Especially if weather impacts you along it, it will take quite a while. So this is when it starts leveling out somewhat once you break that tree line, like I mentioned, and you can hold a quicker pace on this towards the hut itself. The tree line is really where the steepness was, the initial part of the steepness. So that's Fernburn Hut in the distance. It is a bigger hut, a newer hut, a lot of camping outside, water easily accessible close by. So if you decide to stay there, that's awesome. So if you decide to leave the hut and continue climbing, you're going up to a place called Jack's Hall's Saddle. It gets steep again right after that hut. The first mile or two on these tabletops into the hut itself were pretty cruisy. The next mile or two outside of the hut for southbounders is this. Very steep, very, very steeply up. Again, this is going to be a recurring theme in much of this video. So as you're getting closer to the top of Jack Hill's Saddle, it's just getting easier and easier. The elevation is really condensed in that first mile or two out of the hut itself. Again, if you look at this kind of scenery here, you would think there's many camping options, but it doesn't really do it justice to how many tussocks there are. So there's not really a lot of good camping options. I'm pointing this place out because we got very lucky. It's right below the saddle that there's a flat spot without tussocks. This was the only one we found after looking for 10-15 minutes. So get very prepared. If you're planning to camp at the saddle to get one of the climbs done for your day, don't rely on it. You'll be sleeping in tussocks. So if you do camp right below that saddle, at the pretty much only feasible camp spot we did see, again, use your best judgment. Some people might find others, but we only saw one feasible one. Quick little jaunt up to the saddle itself, and this will start your initial descent on the backside. Giant roller coaster through this section. Giant roller coaster. When you gain elevation, you instantly drop it, and this will lead you into the next hut called Highland Hut. Many people also stay here. It's one of those newer types of huts that you can stay at, and this section, the camping is really only at the huts. Again, you might be able to every so often pick and choose a spot, but don't rely on camping when you're in the track itself, because as you see with Magpie, it's muddy. It's just steeply on the side of this kind of hill. Not a whole lot of flat spots to camp. So this is the hut I was talking about, Highland Hut. Again, camping, hut, look into it more if you do decide to want to stay there. Easily water accessible on the back side of this hut where we're dropping into right now. When you leave this hut, get ready for another climb. I'm pointing at it with my trekking pole right here. It just goes straight up that hillside. And where I pointed to at that top is a false summit. So get prepared for more elevation. Once you get to the false summit, this is kind of it. It's a fence line area, and you continue to follow the fence line along ultimately to a higher summit, unnamed. You kind of just top out and you're at the top. This is the top of that said summit or said climb. I apologize. It is a false summit again. The top is marked by this. These two boots mark the top of your climb out of that hut, Highland Hut. Again, your pace will be impacted by this trail. One, just for the grade as well as the steep ascents and descents. But two, if there is weather, it becomes quite muddy. And if it's not muddy, there's a lot of tussocks and just slow going footsteps. This is the next climb. As you see, you drop down into the valley, go straight back up that other side. Really a lot of ascent and descent. It's roller coasters in the magnitude of 1,000, 2,000 foot climbs. So get prepared for that. You do drop down into that valley, as I mentioned. There's a couple spots in these trees. This was the first camping we saw since Highland Hut. So if you do need to stop, there would be a spot to camp in here. Water accessible in these trees as well before your next ascent. But again, don't rely on these water sources besides the places near the huts. And this is the quality of track on the ascent on the other side of said trees. And really, it is just straight up for much of the day if you're not dropping. You do eventually get to a ridgeline. I didn't expect ridgeline running in this. Did not get a whole lot of film on this because of just the conditions we were in. It was super cold, windy, wet. But it's a probably beautiful ridgeline when the sun is out and you can see those beautiful views. You follow this fence line until the ridgeline ultimately does end and starts dropping you steeply down to Rose's Hut. Again, on a clear day, you can see Rose's Hut from this vantage point. Once you see that kind of two-track riverbed or creek bed right here, that signifies the end of your next roller coaster and the start of your next one. So Rose's Hut is behind us. We just popped in. There were 20 plus hikers there because of the weather and wanted to be polite and not film said hikers. That's the hut down there. A lot of camping around there, water accessible, full hut type situation. If you leave the hut, you're going up to Rose's Saddle. Rose's Saddle is by far, my opinion, again, everybody has a different preference, easiest climb of the day. If you look at the elevation profile of this section, it is very sharp up and down. I thought this one was the easiest. It did not feel as sharply up or down as the prior ones. And this will mark your top of the climb of Rose's Saddle. And you can breathe a sigh of relief, but don't breathe that sigh of relief too deeply because there is more TA Looney Tunes land coming up. So you drop down the backside, very windy through here. Again, could have been our weather conditions, but I would recommend just slower going, kind of a buff to protect from that wind. It is just ripping through the mountains and will impact not only your pace, but maybe your sanity. So very beautiful though. Like I said, really wish we could have hit it on some clear days through there because it is just really scenic. Here's that wind I was mentioning. It is just ripping through there. I don't know if that was our conditions per se or if it's always windy, but just be prepared for a wind funnel through this section. So you keep dropping and eventually you'll hit that river over Magpie's Shoulder right there. And you have two options here. You can either do the low water route or the high water route, as you can see here. It had been raining pretty consistently for a few days leading up to this, so we decided to do the high water route. I cannot stress this enough. Heavily recommend doing the low water route if conditions are feasible. The high water route is super washed out. It is a lot of thorns, a lot of overgrowth, very slow steps. As you can see here, Magpie's pushing through a thorn bush, trying to climb back up to the quote-unquote trail. Your pace will be heavily impacted by the high water route. Again, cannot recommend enough. I'm going to say it again. If conditions are feasible, check the forecast, check the river levels. Highly recommend doing the low water route. What you're seeing here is the high water route. I couldn't even film some of the sketchier sections because it did require 3 points of contact at times because it is just very, very slow going. So along the high water route, there are water sources, kind of tributary creeks into the ultimate river down there. So you don't have to worry about water up there, but you do have to worry about all those plants and just the very slow steps. I think we went anywhere from 1.5 miles to 2 miles per hour through here because we were just pushing to the end and we were pushing hard. So don't expect to go quick through there. This boot kind of marks the end of the harder section and it's a gradual descent into the end of the Mutapu track. Pardon my pronunciation. You cross the river. If you were doing the low water track, you were in that river the entire time anyway, but you cross one river if you're on the high water track, and this signifies the start of your 2-track step-in. Easy miles ahead. This is Mace Town. It does have a sandfly infestation, so we ended up pushing past. There are many good spots to camp in Mace Town, in the vicinity there around the trees, flatlands, what have you. We pushed about a mile or 2 extra, as I said, to try to break through the sandflies, but really didn't accomplish much. Would recommend staying in Mace Town if you've kind of had a full day at that point. The camping gets a little less good. After you break that mile or 2 mark, camping really is not feasible due to tussocks. Even though it looks like it's great camping around there, it's tussocks and thick grass. So this day, again, you have 2 options. You have actually multiple options this day, but we'll start with the first 2. When you leave Mace Town, the official trail starts on a hill track, or the official trail goes on a hill track a few miles down the way, or you can take the 2-track in a more roundabout way to the town of Arrowtown. So we ended up taking the 2-track due to a lot of comments and remarks on the official track not being well cut in, being brushy, being slow, being honestly just not good quality track. And many people had taken this alternate this year of 2022-23. So we decided, even though the 2-track was more miles, we would follow that. That's the official trail, big hill track to the right there. We decided to continue on the 2-track ahead, and I think it added anywhere in the ballpark of 3 to 4 miles on the day, maybe a little bit less, but it does add some mileage. But overall, it should be quote unquote easier walking. Don't know, haven't done the big hill track, but it is your own preference, opinion here, just giving you information. So if you do the alternate, it's this long 2-track road that brings you away from Mace Town. There's not a whole lot of climbing per se in it. There are those micro ups and downs every so often, but overall you're just kind of in the river and creek bed and through these giant cuts of rock, which are just beautiful through here. And ultimately, you'll end up dropping into this next riverbed that will be the flavor of the rest of your miles to Arrowtown. This pipeline kind of represents when you start just pretty much fording the river consistently. I don't know how many times we crossed. I would say upwards of 5. And sometimes the 2-track's underneath the river. Again, could have been the conditions we were in with the flooded conditions, but the 2-track was right underneath where I'm standing right now, and you just had to walk directly in the river. So again, check your conditions. Be prepared for flood in pretty much all of New Zealand, specifically the South Island. So this will connect you into Arrowtown. Arrowtown's a very small historic town, limited amenities. You could go to some restaurants there. It's kind of like a subset of Queenstown, more touristy, that type of feel. So there are spots to camp. Look into that information if you so desire. If you decide to go past Arrowtown, the trail becomes twisty and turny. So you're going to have to stay on top of your maps. It is signed pretty well, but there are all these like micro twists and turns that you do have to just check your maps quite frequently. Again, here's some of the signage. There are key moments that there's signs that point you in the right direction, but we ended up taking a left right ahead there and there was no sign. I kept this piece of film super long just for my own personal opinion and preference because I just loved this shot. So you're twisting and turning on the way into Queenstown. You go into this part called Lake Hayes Park or Lake Hayes Walkway along the lake bed. Very popular bike spot, so just be aware with bikers behind you as well as in front of you. I haven't mentioned water today because, as you saw, water is extremely abundant. So you keep getting closer to Queenstown, and the Queenstown track tells you that you are getting closer. Again, very twisty and turny, puts you through these suburbs, does its best to keep you on this type of bike path. Just be aware that it does twist and turn a lot. So I wanted to say here, because of the previous marker of it said day 3, Frankton/Queenstown. Frankton is one of the kind of outlying communities of Queenstown, and once you start getting in that vicinity, you can catch a bus/Uber to Queenstown Official. We did that because it linked our miles up better, and we were going to end up taking an Uber back into Frankston, where this mall is, to connect our steps the following day. So you do have public transport available. You do have options available to get into Queenstown proper if your day's extra long. So this is one of the spots we stayed at in Queenstown. Very big city, very big tourist town, very popular, many amenities. Would recommend resupplying in Frankton, as it is a better grocery store as well as cheaper. There's one of the grocery stores, the Fresh Choice in Queenstown. It's limited supply, limited availability, so just would point that out. And that is Queenstown, and this next section is going to be a doozy.